Chapter 12. Games Non-People Play. Woodrow Derenberger is pregnant. The words flashed up and down the Ohio Valley, and many people who took the absurd rumor seriously. The space people had selected Woody for a unique experiment, so the story went, and he had gone into hiding to nurture his rapidly swelling stomach. He would soon be giving birth to a very special baby, part earthling, part extraterrestrial. The child was slated to grow into a great leader. The events of 1966 through 67 had fractured everyone's sense of credulity. Almost anything now seemed possible. A pregnant man was no more absurd than the winged behemoth or the gigantic illuminated forms that cruised up and down the Ohio nightly. A fantastic new world was taking shape, populated by spacemen who drove Cadillacs and Volkswagens, psychiatrists who had heard bodiless voices in the night, and things that ate dogs and cattle while everyone was looking in the wrong direction. Like everyone else, I was caught up in the games, mystery piling upon mystery. Someone somewhere obviously knew every move I was making, or so it seemed. I became very secretive, not even telling my closest friends where I was going or where I had been. Nevertheless, something seemed to be following me. I would drop in unannounced on a remote farm, and soon after I settled down to chat with the residents, their phone would ring and no one would be on the line, or a series of loud beeps would ring out. The farmer would act astonished. "We've never had a call like that before." The phone would ring repeatedly until I left. This happened several different times in several different places. I used a system of spot checks, visiting homes in flap areas, and talking with people who had never reported anything. Mrs. Hire accompanied me on a number of these spot checks and was amazed at how much had been going on. Her name and face were familiar to everyone in the area, and her reputation as a fair, objective reporter was impeccable. People automatically loosened up when they saw her and talked freely. In the hills surrounding Point Pleasant, we heard many stories about footsteps on the roof, strange metallic clangings, the most common being the sound of a car door slamming outside the house when there were no cars in sight. One family showed us how the flap covering the entrance to their attic had been mysteriously moved. It was a hole in the ceiling of a bedroom and could only be reached with a high ladder. Others complained of gypsies marching across their property late at night, men in bright reflective clothing and women in ankle-length dresses, all with long hair and dark oriental faces. This was well before the hippie explosion of the late 1960s. North of Gallipolis, Ohio, I impulsively stopped at an isolated farmhouse one afternoon, and when I knocked at the door, a grim-faced man answered with a shotgun in his hands. I started to show my credentials and explained who I was, but he cut me short. "I know who you are," he growled. "We don't want anything to do with you. Get out of here." Puzzled, I reported back to Mary and suggested that she visit the farmhouse to see if she could find out the reason for the man's strange behavior. The next day, we went back. I remained in the car while she talked with him for several minutes. Finally, they both came to the car laughing. "You're not going to believe this," the farmer began apologetically, "but 10 minutes before you arrived here yesterday, I got a phone call. It sounded like a neighbor of mine, and he said that he was calling to warn me about a crazy man, a real dangerous type, with a beard, that had just been to see him. Said I shouldn't have anything to do with him. 10 minutes later, you showed up. After you left, I called him back. He was out in the fields, had been all day. His wife had to go get him. He said that he hadn't made that call." I looked at Mary sternly. "Is this some kind of put-on?" "Absolutely not," she answered, turning to the farmer. "Tell him the rest of it." "Well, about a week ago, something scared my cows real bad," he continued. "You know, we ain't told anyone about this, Mrs. Hire. You're not going to put it in the paper, are you? Not if you don't want us to. Come on, let me show you something. He led us into a field behind his barn. There was a 30-foot circle of scorched earth on the hillside. I had just seen several of these fairy circles before. That night, our cows really acted up, he went on. They stampeded. They were so scared they went right through the fence over there. He pointed toward a stretch of wire fence that had obviously just been repaired. It's an electric fence. Now you know that it takes a lot to make the cows charge through an electric fence. Anyway, when I heard the ruckus, I ran outside and I saw my cows scattering down the road. There was a big red and white glowing thing sitting in the field. I've got to say, it scared me half to death. I ran back in the house to get my gun. Didn't take me more than a minute, and when I got outside again, the thing was gone. This circle was all that was left. It took the rest of the night to round up my cows. Were any of them lost or missing? I asked. No, he paused, but Herc, that's Hercules, my big old collie dog, ran off that night and we ain't seen him since. Mary had been with me when I checked into the other missing dog incidents. She gave me a meaningful glance and he caught it. Say, you don't think that thing took old Herc, do you? No, it was probably just some kind of electrical phenomenon, I answered gently. Herc will probably come back. I hope so. We sure love that dog. He looked thoughtful. Electrical, huh? Let me show you something else. He led us into his barn and showed us a brand new circuit box. I had to have this thing put in the next day so I could run my milker. The old box was completely burned out. In fact, it was melted, like someone had put a welding torch to it. See, it must have been some kind of electrical thing, I said lamely. I knew Ivan Sanderson had investigated an almost identical incident in New Jersey only weeks before. But in that case, the cows had been in their stalls in the barn and were found dead. Has anyone else been around to talk to you about this? No, I haven't told anyone. Just some fellows from the electric company who turned up the next day. They fussed around with the transformer on the pole by the road. I tried to talk to them, but they didn't have much to say. Did you know them? Never saw them before. Come to think of it, they didn't have a regular electric truck, just a panel truck. Would you recognize them if you saw them again? Sure would. They was foreigners. You know, Japs or something. Like I said, they weren't really friendly. How were they dressed? Oh, you know, ordinary coveralls. I did notice their shoes, though. They had on funny shoes with very thick rubber soles. Guess when you work around electricity, you need insulation. Mary shuddered perceptibly. Say, do you know these folks? He asked. Mary began. I cut in sharply, thanking the man, promising to keep him out of the papers, and reminding Mary that we had an appointment elsewhere. Back in the car, Mary could no longer curb her natural curiosity. What do you make of all this, John? The more I find out, the more confusing it becomes. That's the way I feel. That phone call. It sounds like someone didn't want you to talk to him. It could work the other way, too, I suggested. Maybe this whole thing was a setup so I would talk to him. I just picked his farm out at random. If he had just turned me away with a smile, I would have never bothered him again. But when he came to the door with a gun... But how did they know you were going to stop there? How could anyone have possibly known? That's the real question. How could anyone have known? A few days before leaving New York, I called Gray Barker in Clarksburg, and he agreed to meet me the following Tuesday in Point Pleasant. As soon as he hung up, I dialed Woodrow Derenberger's unlisted number and spoke to his wife. When are you coming to see us again? She asked. I expect to be in West Virginia next week, I replied. I know, I hear you're having a secret meeting with Gray Barker on Tuesday. I was stunned. I'm meeting with Gray, I admitted, but it's not very secret. I didn't know myself until a couple of minutes ago. How on earth did you know? There was a pause. Charlie Cutler over in Ohio told us about it a couple days ago, she finally said. And how did he know about it? I don't know. I suppose he heard it from somewhere. When you enter the unreal world of the contactees, predictions, prophecies, and a mysterious invasion of your privacy becomes commonplace. Contactees seem to develop a heightened perception, ESP, and precognition. The changes occur almost overnight. In their meetings with entities, they are served up on platters of propaganda along with rumors and nonsense, which they accept and repeat as fact. Many of the choicest tidbits in UFO lore were not actual events, but were put into circulation by contactees who place their complete trust in their contactors. The entities spun wild tales about crash saucers being confiscated by the U.S. Air Force, farmers shooting and wounding spacemen, and so forth. Contactees repeated these stories to wide-eyed UFO enthusiasts, and so they spread in ever-widening circles until they appeared in articles and books. Derenberger never claimed psychic powers. He said he received telepathic messages from Indrid Cold giving him specific information. Others, such as Ted Owens and Uri Geller, have also claimed that their psychic abilities came from space intelligences. Mr. Owens has racked up an impressive record predicting the outcomes of football games. Mr. Geller, an Israeli psychic, became world famous in his alleged contact with a flying saucer on a desert in the Middle East. Both men have been examined and tested by armies of scientists and parapsychologists. I have probably examined and befriended more UFO contactees than anyone else. Usually their experiences follow certain patterns which they are not even aware of at the time. A long series of seemingly unrelated events occur prior to their first overt contact. These events can begin in childhood and span many years. Then, too, most contactees have active or latent psychic abilities before contact. People who see ghosts or religious apparitions have the same patterns as the UFO contactees. And in fact, the apparitions described in religious miracles usually share the same physical characteristics as our UFO entities. That is, long fingers, dusty complexions, pointed features. The flying saucer lore of the past 27 years has been built on three main components. 1. The sighting reports, usually poorly investigated by amateurs and believers, or based entirely on fragmented and often inaccurate newspaper stories. 2. The testimony of contactees. 3. Messages received through spirit mediums and ESP. In recent years, a new element has been added by the few scientists pulled into the controversy. This is the tiresome use of probabilities to explain that there must be zillions of other planets and therefore must be uncounted numbers of uninhabited places in the universe. In the early 1960s, exobiology became the new scientific ripoff. Various foundations and NASA poured millions of dollars into the study of extraterrestrial life. Since there were no samples available for study, and since there is not the slightest bit of evidence that a single planet exists in any other star system, exobiology was not an easy field. Scientists had to justify their enormous expenditures with reams of speculative papers. We do not even have enough facts after 15 years of study to form a real basis for the coveted probabilities. If Nick the Greek were asked to make a book on the existence of extraterrestrial life, he would find the scientific arguments so tenuous that the odds would have to be somewhere around 1,000,000,000,000 to 1. Of the 9 planets in our solar system, only 3, Mercury, Earth, and Mars, are solid, and one of these 3 is infested with life. The appearance of life requires a long list of environmental and chemical conditions. For all of these conditions to exist simultaneously on a single planet also requires a whole series of improbable coincidences. Men have always gazed into the night sky and dreamed of other worlds. 4,000 years ago, Enoch became the first space traveler, visiting 7 worlds or planets after being roused from his sleep by an angelic spaceman. Swedenborg, the great Swedish mathematician, went wandering through the cosmos in the 1700s, and a proper Bostonian named William Denton was given a guided tour of Venus in the 1860s. George Adamski, Howard Menger, and several others visited the moon in the 1950s, preceding Neil Armstrong by more than a decade. Menger, a New Jersey sign painter, brought back some moon potatoes that looked like rocks, and they didn't cost the taxpayers a cent. Adamski, a California eccentric, found the backside of the moon rich in vegetation and water. Others observed cunningly concealed underground cities there. Still, others have traveled to scores of unknown planets in distant galaxies. Planets with exotic-sounding names adopted from ancient Greek, just as most of the entities who stop lone drivers on isolated backyards claim from mythology. For example, on Wednesday, July 26, 1967, Mrs. Mary's DeLong and Michael Keisner were driving in a park near California's Big Tujunga Canyon when they heard a bodiless voice which instructed them to watch for something unusual. There was a flash of light in the sky, and a glowing disk 20 feet in diameter appeared. Soon they were chatting with Cronin, master of the Cronian race. He was very tall and both boneless and eyeless, and said he was a space robot encased in a time capsule. As soon as Mrs. DeLong reached her home after the visit, her phone rang. It was Cronin. She later recorded several conversations with him in which he explained the problems of the universe. She had never heard of Cronus, the Roman god of time. Another entity popular in occult circles for centuries is the Asheroth, the Phoenician goddess of love. A character called Ashtar has been communicating with UFO fans for years, coming through worldwide seances on Ouija boards and through mental telepathy. Ashtar is a big cheese in the Intergalactic Federation. Contactees have churned out dozens of books filled with his messages. A woman on Long Island had an encounter with an olive-skinned gentleman in a greenish suit May 1967, and his name caused me some problems. He called himself Aphiles. I finally figured out that was from aphilogistic, a word derived from Greek meaning a lamp giving light without flame. Woodrow Derenberger's Mr. Cold did not fit this pattern. In fact, the name made me suspicious of Woody's story, and if I had not talked with the others who had shared a similar experience that night, I might have rejected Derenberger outright because of it. In earlier times, fairies, demons, even human witches practicing their Black Sabbath rites chose gravel pits, garbage dumps, cemeteries, and crossroads for their appearances. Modern hairy monsters and UFOs select the same sites, and quite a few UFO contacts have occurred near crossroads or on highways still under construction, at points where old highways were once intersected. Derenberger's first contact with Cold was on a newly completed highway, yards from an old intersection. Across the river, the vast Indian mounds of Ohio stand as mute testimony of some earlier culture almost identical to the culture which constructed the Great Mounds of Great Britain. The latter were joined by straight tracks or lays which formed a complicated grid system. I wondered if a similar lay grid may not have once existed in West Virginia, and I studied aerial photos and old maps looking for such a system. There are tiny traces here and there, but modern farmers and builders have destroyed most of the old artifacts, just as they destroyed a great many of the mounds, stone towers, etc., that stood on this continent when the first Europeans arrived. Had Woody been stopped on a crosspoint of some old lane network? The only clue lies in Mr. Cold's uncharacteristic selection for a name. In his study of the British lays, The View Over Atlantis, John Mitchell stated, A peculiar feature of the old alignments is that certain names appear with remarkable frequency along their routes. Names with red, white, and black are common. So are Cold, Cole, Dodd, Mary, and Lay. It would be in keeping with the twisted logic of the entities to call attention to a West Virginia lay system by staging their landings at specific points along the grid and adopting names like Cold. Apparently, this is exactly what they did in 1966 and 1967. So as far as I know, Cold and his mischievous companions never presented themselves to other contactees, or they changed their names to suit each occasion. This, too, is a break with tradition. Ashtar, Orathon, and several others with names that sounded like synthetic fabrics have contacted thousands of people all over the world in the past 20 years. In September 1973, just before the Great October UFO Wave, posters sprang up all over Atlanta, Georgia, proclaiming the imminent arrival of the space people. A Georgia psychic was in mental communication with Xandark, who identified himself as a member of the United Cosmic Council, a commander-in-chief in charge of directing technical transmission via mental telepathy or combination of mediumistic telepathy under the direction of the Confederation of Cosmic Space Beings. Xandark delivered the usual "we come to bring peace" message, claimed the credit for building the Sphinx, the pyramids, and other structural phenomena, and complained that contactees were not being taken seriously enough, but were being branded fools, fanatics, and personal publicity seekers. We were advised to shape up. Each of Xandark's communications began with the salutation, Adonai Vasu. When the sitters at the Atlantic seances asked for a translation, they were told it meant peace be with you and love forever. Unknown to the Georgia group, a contactee in Italy, Eugenio Saragusa, has been in touch with the space people for years, and his contactor always signs off with, "May the light of the universe peace be with you," signed, Adonias. Adonias is a manufactured word, a sort of romanization of Adonai, an ancient Hebrew word for God. Vasu stems from the Latin vasus, meaning servant. So Adonai Vasu really means servant of God. Old Xandark is just another angel in disguise. Adoniases and Adonai are not so far removed from each other. It is interesting that the same terms would turn up at seances an ocean apart. Even more interesting is the fact that the messages received by psychics everywhere bear remarkable similarities in content, even phrasing. I have researched obscure contactee-type books written 200 and 300 years ago, and I have found the same identical messages and phraseology were prevalent then. Since so much of this literature is very obscure and hard to find, and since many of our psychics and contactees are poorly read, it is doubtful if this is a question of fakers repeating the earlier material. Rather, it seems as if there is a phonograph in the sky endlessly repeating the same material generation after generation, as if there were a crack in the record. Author Brad Strager interviewed scores of psychics, prophets, and contactees for his study of the phenomenon, Revelation, the Divine Fire. He found that people claiming to be in communication with God, angels, spirits of the dead, and spacemen from other planets were all receiving essentially the same information. All spoke of an impending disaster, just as Xandark warned. The time for your planet is crucial. But the prophets and seers of the last century were getting the same spiel. William Miller, 1972 to 1849, founded the Seventh-day Adventist in the belief that the world was coming to an end in 1943. Interestingly, prophets all over the world and tribes of Hopi and Navajo Indians in the Southwest picked that same year. Clearly, they all tuned into the same static. Jehovah's Witnesses were founded in 1872 on a similar premise. The message is delivered to the children in Fatima, Portugal in 1917, also discussed the coming disaster, but phrased in obscure theological terms. Again and again, psychics and contactees have gathered their family and friends together to sit on a hilltop and wait for the predicted end of the world. This charade has been repeated many times in the past 25 years with UFO contactees preparing for the wonderful space people to descend in their flying saucers and evacuate a chosen few from our doomed planet. The world was supposed to end on December 24th, 1967. Occult and UFO groups around the world got the message in every language. A Danish cult actually built a lead-lined bomb shelter and spent the holidays cringing in it, waiting for the big blast. In 1973, a UFO contactee in Wisconsin soberly announced that the comet Kohoutek was going to wreck the Earth that Christmas. He was recruiting people to be evacuated by his space friends. Xandark, Orthon, Ashtar, Zeno, Cold, and all their cronies have been leading many of us around by the noses for centuries. First, they convince us of their honesty, reliability, the accuracy of their predictions, and their well-meant intentions. Then they leave us sitting on a hilltop waiting for the world to blow up. When the world was sparsely populated, and the signals from the superspectrum were not so smothered in such static from the lower spectrum, men learned to place great faith in these entities and their prophecies. Priests, scholars, and magicians achieved a marvelous understanding of the cosmos and cosmic forces through astrology, alchemy, and the magical manipulation of matter. But as man followed the angelic dictate, multiply and replenish the earth, our planet began to suffer from psychic pollution. The record on the great phonograph in the sky cracked, stuck in a single groove, single groove, single groove, single. The contactee syndrome is a fundamental reprogramming process. No matter what frame of reference is being used, the experience usually begins with either the sudden flash of light or sound, a humming, buzzing, or beeping. The subject's attention is riveted to a pulsing, flickering light of dazzling intensity. He finds that he is unable to move a muscle and is rooted to the spot. Next, the flickering light goes through a series of color changes. A seemingly physical object begins to take form. The light diminishes, revealing a boat. If the event occurs on a lake or a river, a flying machine of unusual configuration, or an entity of some sort. What's really happening? The percipient is first entranced by the flickering light. From the moment he feels paralyzed, he loses touch with reality and begins to hallucinate. The light remains a light, but his or her mind constructs something else. This can be compared with normal hypnosis. I have been an amateur hypnotist for many years. A hypnotized subject very often thinks he is fully conscious, that the hypnosis isn't working and he is just going along with the hypnotist. But when he tries to move or disobey a command, he is surprised to find he can't. The paralysis report in so many UFO cases really is a form of hypnosis. In the 1940s, medical science discovered a flicker phenomenon. Some human brains are extremely responsive to a flickering light, that such a light can produce an epileptic-type trance accompanied by elaborate hallucinations. In The Battle of the Mind, William Sargent pointed out, "It should be more widely known that electrical recordings of the human brain show that it is particularly sensitive to rhythmic stimulation by percussion and bright light among other things, and certain types of rhythm can build up recordable abnormalities of the brain function and explosive states of tension sufficient even to produce convulsive fits in predisposed subjects. Some people can be persuaded to dance in time with such rhythms until they collapse in exhaustion. Furthermore, it is easy to disorganize the normal function of the brain by attacking it simultaneously with several strong rhythms played in different tempos. This leads to protective inhibition, either rapidly in the weak inhibitory temperament or after a prolonged period of excitement in the strong excitatory one. When the flicker or pulsing sound happens to be synchronized with the alpha rhythm of a particular brain, the brain is short-circuited. There are cases in which some people are triggered by the flickering of a motion picture image and overcome with an urge to strangle the person sitting next to them. Dr. Gray Walter of the Burton Neurological Institute at Bristol, England, had a patient who passed out while riding a bicycle along an avenue of trees. The trees produced the flicker phenomenon as he sped past them. A few subjects yielded epileptic patterns, Dr. Walter noted in his book, The Living Brain. Auditory experiences were rare, but there may be organized hallucinations, that is, complete scenes, as in dreams, involving more than one sense. All sorts of emotion are experienced: fatigue, confusion, fear, disgust, anger, pleasure. Sometimes the sense of time is lost or disturbed. One subject said that he had been pushed sideways in time. Yesterday at one side instead of behind, and tomorrow was off the port bow. In short, a light flickering at exactly the right frequency can place the witness in a hypnotic-like trance. He views this as paralysis since he loses control of his limbs for the duration of the trance, even though a part of his mind remains conscious. He views the hallucinations of the trance as a continuation of the reality he was experiencing a moment before. Like a normal subject of hypnosis, he loses his sense of time. Time can be compressed or expanded as in a dream. Events which seem to span several hours are actually hallucinated in seconds or minutes, or the reverse can occur. When he comes out of this trance and looks at his watch, he finds that hours may have passed, even though he thought he only watched the light for a few seconds. In a religious miracle such as that at Garabandal, Spain, in the 1960s, crowds surrounded the small children as they entered trances and conversed with entities only they could see. The children sometimes remained motionless for hours, but when they came out of their trances, they thought only minutes had passed. The psychedelic lights and flickering strobes, so popular with the youth culture in the 1960s, actually served to induce trances and produce quasi-religious experiences, particularly when coupled with the mind-numbing beat of hard rock music and hallucinogenic drugs. The euphoria of the big rock festivals was a direct product of this phenomenon. Young people voluntarily and enthusiastically submitted themselves to a brainwashing process, reprogramming themselves or being reprogrammed by an outside force which, as the violence and social upsets of the period demonstrate, was not always benevolent. When a contactee comes out of his trance, he often finds himself suffering from severe headaches and muscular aches and pains for days afterward. Great lethargy is another common symptom, with the recipient indulging in excessive sleep exhausted. These symptoms are comparable to those of epileptics who have suffered muscle spasms. Excessive thirst, another symptom, is probably caused by something else. Dehydration from exposure to intense low-frequency electromagnetic radiation. Such radiation penetrates and dries every tissue. The mechanism, the light flashes, can be subjective, seen only by the percipient, or objective, seen by others and even photographable. The subject's flashes must be caused by radiation, which bypasses the eyes and optic nerves and is received directly by the brain. Objective flashes are masses of energy moving through the visible spectrum. Witnesses whose minds are not tuned to the specific frequency of the flickering of the object are not affected, except by the actinic rays that may be emitted. When investigating multiple UFO sightings, I am not concerned with the chance witnesses of objective light. Rather, I try to seek out those persons who were directly affected by the light. They rarely report their sighting, either because the accompanying hallucination was so bizarre or so terrifying, or because they simply had no memory of the entire event. They suffered lacunal amnesia. When I succeeded in finding such people, I obtained their entire life history and keep in touch with them for a long period after my interview to observe any changes in personality or outlook that may occur. In some cases, rapid deterioration takes place. The recipient has innumerable secondary hallucinations, just as a person who has taken LSD can go on another trip unexpectedly weeks later. He can become mentally unbalanced, abandon his family and his work, develop into a fanatic, and in several unfortunate cases, end up with a nervous breakdown or commit suicide. On the other side of the coin, some recipients experience a profound expansion of consciousness, a greatly increased IQ, and a complete change of lifestyle for the better. Since this is a historic process and continuing one, it is probable that most great leaders have had a contact experience at some point in their early life. Canadian psychiatrist Dr. Richard Buke conducted the first study of this phenomenon in his book Cosmic Consciousness, published in the year 1900. In religious circles, the phenomenon is called illumination. In its purest form, illumination is not a religious experience. For a brief few moments, the recipient truly understands, the workings of the entire universe. He perceives all history, past, present, and future, totally. He feels as if he's a part of the superspectrum and is one with the cosmos. Unfortunately, when the brief experience is over, he cannot remember most of it because it has been added to his subconscious, and he cannot articulate those parts he can remember. Because he has been reprogrammed, even prepared for a new role in life, to some the experience is the call that propels them into the clergy. There seems to be a rule that each cosmic force has its imitators. Victims of UFO contact are often suffering from false illumination. Either their minds have misinterpreted the experience, or a lower force has reprogrammed them using the same mechanism. In a sense, they become possessed. They suffer from hallucinosis, repeated hallucinations. Their lives are manipulated disastrously. Once a person has undergone false illumination, he becomes vulnerable to repetitions. Just as once a person has been hypnotized, he can be easily hypnotized again. The phenomenon is dependent on belief, and as more and more people believe in flying saucers from other planet, the lower force can manipulate more people through false illumination. I have been watching, with great consternation, a worldwide spread of the UFO belief and its accompanying disease. If it continues unchecked, we may face a time when a universal acceptance of the fictitious space people will lead us to a modern faith in extraterrestrials that will enable them to interfere overtly in our affairs, just as the ancient gods dwelling on mountaintops directly ruled large segments of the population in the Orient, Greece, Rome, Africa, and South America. However they arrived at their 1953 decision, the CIA Air Force plan to debunk, downgrade, and ridicule flying saucers was in retrospect the most responsible course the government could take. But they underestimated the scope of the phenomenon and its ability to manipulate humans and generate propaganda. On May 20th, 1967, Steve Malachek was out prospecting near Falcon Lake, Manitoba, Canada, when he saw a large circular object land. It seemed to be made of glittering metal, like stainless steel. He approached it and thought he could hear voices mumbling inside. He called out, but received no answer. Instead, the object spewed out some kind of gas or flame which caught him full in the chest and sent him reeling backward as it took off. Both his shirt and skin underneath were burned with an odd checkerboard pattern. Mr. Malachek became extremely ill, suffering a week of blackouts, nausea, headaches, and a weight loss of 20 pounds. It took him many weeks to return to normal. Then, on September 21st, 1967, 124 days after the initial incident, the burns on his chest returned and his body began to swell. He was hospitalized and again returned to normal, but the malady returned every 109 to 124 days. In August 1968, after a year of reoccurring illnesses, he visited the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota at his own expense. Doctors there told him they had treated another UFO victim from California who suffered the same thing. His problem stemmed from a foreign substance in his blood, he was told. When scientists from the Air Force-financed UFO study conducted by Colorado University visited Malachek, they asked to see the place where the saucer had landed. He admitted that he had been searching for that spot himself, without success. He was puzzled by his inability to locate it. Despite his inexplicable injury, the scientists viewed this inability as proof that his story was a hoax. In their final report, they implied that he was not telling the truth. Actually, there were a great many cases in which the witnesses found they could not relocate the site of their experience. Buildings and landmarks clearly seen at the time seemed to vanish. Roads and highways disappear. This bewildering phenomenon is well known in psychic lore also, probably because many psychic experiences are hallucinatory too. There are innumerable stories about restaurants that seem to dissolve after the witnesses stop there. Tales of disappearing houses are common. A weary traveler stops at an old abandoned house for the night, just like in the movies, and later learns the house he stayed in does not exist, or had burned down years ago. True to reflective factor, as I was writing this, I received a letter from F.W. Holliday, the British investigator, in which he tells the following. A family in the south of England still spend their weekends driving around woods looking for a mysterious lake they encountered some 15 years ago. Out in the middle, they saw a huge rock with a sword driven into it. Later, they went back to do some research, but there was no trace of such a lake. No one had heard of it, and it isn't on the maps. One could fill a book with such incidents, and indeed, some authors have. Long ago, I classified such episodes as distortions of reality. Throughout history, people have been straying through Alice's looking glass, seeing things that don't exist, visiting places that spill off the maps into some hallucinatory other dimension. 15 years ago, there was a lake in England with a sword jutting out of a stone, waiting for some king to come along and pull it out, shouting, "Excalibur!" This is no more ridiculous than stumbling upon a secret flying saucer base nestled in the hills of New England and bustling with activity. Contactees have claimed such things. An engineer named Rex Ball swears he came upon a mysterious underground installation in Georgia in 1940, manned by small oriental-looking men in coveralls and a few American military officers. When he was caught in the tunnels, one of the officers issued a curt command, "Make him look like a nut." He woke up in a field, uncertain whether his experience had been real or a dream. That seems to be the battle cry of the phenomenon. Make him look like a nut.